So this video is about identifying your victims in a federal criminal case. And the reason why this is important is a lot of your sentencing guidelines, you can get up to a 3-point reduction for taking accountability. Your PSR and the recommendations of the probation department will greatly reflect what they believe to be the amount of accountability, responsibility you've taken for your crimes. And this will be also something your judge is looking at when sentencing you, and the probation department looks at and giving recommendations for sentencing. So it is vital that part of taking responsibility and accountability for your crimes largely is acknowledging your victims, apologizing to your victims, and if at all possible, trying to make some type of amends to your victims, trying to mitigate the harm that you've done or do restorative justice. Now, there are a lot of charges where people say, but I have a victimless crime, so this doesn't apply to me. Well, if that's the belief you want to have, or the belief that is comfortable for you, that will be an Achilles heel for you throughout this process and getting the most lenient sentence possible. So let's just throw that idea away and let's figure out who your victims are and how to move forward. If you have a financial crime, let's say you embezzled money from a corporation. Let's say you scammed millionaires. Now, if you have a financial crime and your victims were not the extremely wealthy, then it's very obvious these are your victims. But if your victims were, corporate embezzlement, for example, something that doesn't even have a face, the victim of your crime is the corporation you embezzled money from. The victims of your crime are the shareholders and the stockholders in that corporation. So these are the parties that you need to express to the court that you acknowledge are your victims and you feel remorseful to. And the court's going to require in financial crimes full restitution. So you need to just volunteer to do that because it's going to happen anyway. And it's better if it looks like it's happening on your own merits than the court imposing it upon you. Now, drug crimes. My crime is a drug crime. My actual charge is use of a communications facility to facilitate drug trafficking. So if you have a drug crime, and if you're on the federal level, you probably weren't doing cells on a street corner out of a trap house. It's probably much higher level than that. And generally these are considered victimless crimes by the public. Sometimes even the probation department will say it's victimless. But when you give allocution, if you can identify and acknowledge your victim and show remorse or victims, then you've done yourself a huge service in getting leniency at sentencing. The same goes for when you do your PSR interview. If you at that point have identified who your victims are and you show remorse and you have a plan to do restorative justice to mitigate the harm you've done, this will assist you greatly. So now you're wondering, who in the world is the victim, of, let's say, someone who's moving drugs in large quantities state to state. People that are only selling to people that will sell on the street or sell to people who sell on the street, depending on how far up the food chain you are. Your victims are the communities in which your drugs were distributed. Those are your victims. Because when you are part of a systematic distribution of narcotics, of drugs, or illegal guns. This is for people that were gun dealers as well. With the drugs, with the guns, inevitably those guns will go into the hands of those who are not legally supposed to possess guns, and therefore, potentially increase the rate of gun crimes in the area in which they are sold, or create a danger for the general public where they are distributed or sold. With drugs, it's very similar. When you have drugs in a community, you have drug addicts. Supply and demand. Well, when the drug addicts want to get their drugs, they have to buy them. Most drug addicts on this level are not people who are, trust fund babies that, can just go dip in a bank account to fuel their habits for the rest of their lives. Most of these people will have to commit crimes, often preying upon the most vulnerable members of society to support their habits. So by you being part of the systematic distribution of narcotics, you have played a role in a situation that has created victims of home break-ins, victims of robberies, victims of identity theft, victims of assaults. You have played a role in creating these victims. So these are inadvertently your victims. Now, I seen someone say today on another YouTube channel that they had a federal gun charge. And even probation said, it's a gun charge. I think the guy was just not even supposed to have a gun. He had a gun. And I said, I don't have any victims, because there was another page where someone else was saying, no, identify your victims, take accountability. And when he asked the person whose page it was, I have a victimless gun crime. Who was my victim? The guy was like, I don't know. I'll make a blog later about it, or one day I'll write an article. I don't know. I'll figure it out for you. His victims, as I told him, were, see, when you illegally carry a gun, this is not really a lot of my personal perspective, but seeing things from a logistic, logical way that the courts can respect and understand and support and get behind to help you. When you're in possession of a gun illegally, when people illegally possess guns, it creates a level of comfortability for other people to illegally possess guns. And quite often the victims of gun crimes are, at the hands of those who illegally possess guns, from a very, kind of legal parameters perspective. When there are handguns in the hands of those who cannot legally possess them in a community, the threat level of the community, the danger in general within the community is increased. You are going to go to prison with a gun crime with the feds. It is what it is. Know that. And you need to acknowledge that allocution and say, I realize that, even though I didn't personally harm anyone, the fact that I illegally was in possession of a gun, really added to the culture of which, people illegally possess guns, and this greatly adds to the culture of gun violence. And I understand that I'm going to have to go to prison for some period of time because, I cannot not go to prison, because that sets a precedence in society for people who are potentially dangerous. I'm not dangerous, but there are people who are potentially dangerous. And if everybody who couldn't legally have a gun has a gun, because people aren't going to prison for having guns illegally, it would create a dangerous precedent, and it would increase the threat to society. You did not personally victimize any particular person. However, the action of your crime inadvertently creates it strengthens the criminal element. It greatens the criminal element. It greatens the general societal danger. That is your victim. So, so my point is no matter what type of case you have. I know one guy, he went to federal prison because he was helping people cheat on their taxes and, getting them back crazy amounts of money. And he, of course, was getting a large cut. Now, you may say, well, where's the victim there? I mean, the people that he was working with, knew what he was doing, wanted him to do it. They got money, he got money, everybody wins. But no, when funds are allocated improperly, when people lie on their taxes, when you lie to get a PPP loan or PPE or whatever the thing is, the economy loans, when funds are misappropriated, or when you get an economy-based loan and you don't use it properly, when you misappropriate funds, or when you cause funds to be misappropriated, that takes funding from the people or the sources or the agencies or the organizations that those funds were actually intended for. First off, if something isn't yours, you're not entitled to it unless you've bought it or been given it or worked for it. So, if you are doing the 3P loans and you're taking that money and going on shopping sprees and misappropriating funds, and you find yourself in front of a federal judge, or if you're a person who helped people cheat the tax system a little bit, you got, monies under false pretenses. You caused monies to be given to parties they weren't entitled to, which is theft. As a matter of fact, on a state level, this is called theft by deception. And it's generally a felony depending upon the amount. But on a federal level, they have a lot of other fancy terms for it, but it's potato, same thing. So no matter how much you may say, your lawyer may say, the federal probation department may say, your friends and family community may say, your crime was victimless. If you go into your sentencing, or you do your allocution, or you write a personal narrative with the attitude that your crime was without a victim, you're going to convey to the judge in the federal probation department that you're not taking full responsibility. This is going to affect your guideline points. This is going to, which will affect, you know, by default, your housing designation in prison. This will largely influence the probation department to make a harsher recommendation, and also for the judge to sentence you more harshly. So really dig deep here, do a lot of introspect, do a lot of real looking at things outside the box from a solely intellectual, analytical perspective, not an emotional one. And you really have to identify who are your victims. And you need to apologize in court. You need to acknowledge who your victims are and apologize. And like if you have like a drug crime, start doing some community service right now. If you have pretty much any kind of crime, start doing some community service, you know, especially in these kind of crimes where the victim is a gray area or an unknown. You know, say that I know my actions, you know, in some way harmed or had potential. The potential was there because I chose to commit crime to harm my community. And I'm not comfortable being a person who has harmed my community, contributed to the harm of my community, or even set forth some circumstances that could have created harm. Therefore, I'm trying to rectify that and make amends and build up the community that I contributed to tearing down, or I threatened, or I, you know, did things that potentially could have harmed. You know, I want to really convey, you know, my regret, my sincere remorse, and I want to do so by being proactive. And if you do this now before you go into sentencing, you have proof of this, preferably, or if you tell the judge this is your plan to right your wrongs, you tell this to the probation department when they do PSR, these things will greatly help you as far as the federal probation giving a nicer recommendation, which you definitely is going to benefit you in the long run when they do your PSR, as well as your sentencing judge being more lenient with you, and as well as, you know, just gaining the respect and actually opening a door for possibly getting compassion from your judge. So this is how to identify your victims and what to do after you identify your victims. So I hope this video has been helpful. And as always, fly high my phoenixes. Good night. God bless.